All right, please put your hands together for the next storyteller, Kendra, Goffredo. I knew the moment that my father died because I was holding his hand in mine. And in my palm, I could feel his temperature drop from the fiery hot of the living to the cold of the dead. We were in his bedroom. 13 years before, down the hall from his bedroom, I was in my bedroom preparing for a different kind of goodbye. I was packing my bags for my first Peace Corps assignment in Nepal. And my dad came into my room and he told me that the doctors had found cancer in his plasma cells, and they called it multiple myeloma, and they said he had 3 to 5 years to live. It was 3 p.m. in California, which meant it was 6 p.m. in Washington, D.C., so when I picked up the phone to call the Peace Corps to let them know that I would not be reporting for service next week, everyone had already gone home for the weekend and no one was there to take my call. So my dad spent the better part of that weekend convincing me that I did need to go to Nepal. And I remember the words he told me. He said, there were things that I would learn in Nepal that he couldn't teach me. And I believed him, and so I went. And that first month in my village in Nepal, I felt like the specter of death had followed me. My teaching colleague's mother died of an unknown illness, and then a 6-year-old girl at the school died of typhoid fever, and then a baby died of dehydration, caused from diarrhea, caused from dirty drinking water, caused by being born in the wrong village in the wrong country. But that month was not an anomaly. I came to see that death is so much more a part of life in that village in Nepal than it ever would be for my life in the United States. And it's not just because it happens more often, but because of simple economics. Because there's no hospital to call, there's no doctor to call, there's no nurse, there's no funeral home, there's no stranger with a gurney or an ambulance that will show up when it's your mother or your daughter or your baby. It's just you. And so we as a community, when my colleague's mother died, we took her body down to the river and we cremated it on the river banks according to Nepali Hindu custom. And I, the American, stood back in horror because I had been accustomed as an American to being insulated from this horror of death. But just as that community would become a part of my life, so too would death become a part of my life. And no story is more significant to that death becoming a part of my life than one day when I went to my friend Sangeeta's house, and Sangeeta was about my age. We were both 22, and I went into her house and to have tea, and I was overcome with this horrible stench of urine, and I tried breathing through my mouth so that I wouldn't gag and embarrass myself, and I scanned the room to find out where was this horrible stench of urine coming from, and there was a man in the corner, and he was under a blanket, and he appeared lifeless except for once in a while he would moan in agony. And this was Sangeeta's father, and he was dying from something that she didn't know, and he had no diagnosis, and he had no treatment, and he had no morphine, because these are the things that Nepali daughters dream about when their fathers are dying. And in between sips of tea, Sangeeta washed her father and cared for him and soothed his hallucinations and fed him and gave him drink without the benefit of an IV or a straw. And I sat back and I thought to myself how lucky I am that when my father arrives in this state, I can insulate, I can outsource this misery to a nurse or a home health aide or to morphine. But then 13 years later, which was only 2 months ago, it was my father who was bone thin and weak from outliving his prognosis by 8 years, and from nausea and from starvation. And it was my father whose skin was yellow and whose mouth was bleeding from dryness because I couldn't get him to keep it closed. And then it was me who was flossing the blood out of his teeth. And I thought back to Sangeeta, the way she held her father's hand. In a matter-of-fact way, she held her father's hand in a way that someone who cannot have the option of outsourcing that kind of pain does. And though I had the option as a citizen of the developed world, it's no greater privilege I've known than to make my father's death a very real part of my life. And as I sat there holding his hand, feeling it turn cold, I thought back to those words that he had told me before I went to Nepal, that there would be things I would learn in Nepal that he couldn't teach me. And I think about how beautiful it was that in his last day, I could share those lessons with him. Thank you.